for the boards of elections in each county to realign the new assembly districts with the election districts, because as most of you know, your election districts are the building blocks of your assembly districts for petitioning and election purposes. So that's where we stand today.
Thanks, Jeff. For all of you, you can watch on the State League website. We will, keep you updated as to what's going on next week. So just keep watching on that, and we'll send out emails, and watch our social media sites. That's where we've been posting even quicker some of the actions that happened recently. So anyway, that's state redistricting, and you all have been great, and we have had a full year. It was just a year ago in January, just a year ago this month, that we started all the education on the state redistricting process, and it's been a busy year, and we appreciate and thank everyone for all the hard work they've done on state redistricting. But now what we need to look at is county and local redistricting. This is now turning to that redistricting. So that's what tonight's focus is on. And we have three great speakers to talk about this. I also want to say that there is a very basic toolkit that we posted today on the state website. Millie, if you want to put the address in the chat box, that talks about county and local redistricting. Some of the things that you will hear tonight are in this and are explained in this toolkit. So if you're looking for some very basic information on how county redistricting works, you can look at that toolkit as well. So anyway, our first speaker is Jeff Weiss, who you just heard from. Jeff is an adjunct professor and senior fellow at New York Law School, where he directs the New York Census and Redistricting Institute. He's now serving on his 5th redistricting cycle. In past years, he served as redistricting counsel to 5 state assembly speakers and 4 state Senate Democratic leaders. He's the co-editor and author of the National Conference of State Legislatures 2020 Redistricting Red Book, a comprehensive handbook on the census and redistricting processes. He also serves as a redistricting counsel to numerous state and local governments across New York and the nation. And he's been a big help to the League this past year on dealing with and learning more about the state redistricting process. So thank you very much, Jeff, and I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, well, hello again. I'm going to work through a PowerPoint presentation so you can follow along with me. I'm just lining that up here. So if I can just see somebody with a thumbs up that you see the screen. Okay, so I'll spend about 10-15 minutes on the basics of local redistricting. Much of it follows state legislative and congressional redistricting rules. At the federal level, we have the US Constitution. The 14th Amendment requires, through the one person, one vote doctrine, that like state and congressional districts, county, city, town, and village districts also follow the one person, one vote population equality requirement. That essentially means that each district within a jurisdiction, within a plan, must be equipopulous. And also the 14th Amendment bans racial gerrymandering. That is the overpacking of minority voters into a district that then diminishes their ability to elect candidates in surrounding districts. The second federal law is the Voting Rights Act. And that's different a bit from the 14th Amendment, which prohibits packing of too many people into a district. Instead, the Voting Rights Act, under what's known as Section 2 of the federal law, prohibits minority vote dilution, that you can't take the minority community and spread it out into too few districts if it could be demonstrated that the minority voters could constitute at least 50% of the population of an ideal district, and that it could be demonstrated conclusively that there is a very high level of racially polarized voting where the majority white population denies the Black, Hispanic, or Asian communities their ability to elect a candidate of choice. For those of you in the Albany area, In the last decade, the Albany County Legislature fell victim to a Voting Rights Act violation. And for those of you downstate, in Rockland County, East Ramapo School District, and on Long Island, the Islip Town Board in Suffolk County, all were found to have violated the Voting Rights Act in just the last few years. Of course, we also have the New York State Constitution, and then we have New York State laws. We're going to spend particular focus on state laws because, as my co-panelist Dale Barbario will talk about, there is a new law enacted last year that creates special criteria for local government redistricting beyond the federal and state constitutional requirements. And then, of course, we have county and local laws where you have county charters, city charters that delineate special criteria for those jurisdictions, often also determining how the lines are redrawn within the counties, towns, cities, and villages. Let me move my slide. Okay, so who must redistrict? Well, every local government, every government with a legislative body that elects members from districts is subject to redistricting. That could mean school districts, it means county legislatures, city councils, town boards. And just like for Congress and the state legislature, once every 10 years, after the federal decennial census is taken, you have to redistrict the local districts before the next election. That means, this year we have congressional, assembly, and Senate elections. So all the new lines need to be in place, as I just mentioned, by March 1st for this year's primary. Most jurisdictions hold their local elections in the odd year next year. I think at the county level, that applies statewide, except for Broome and one other county that is just escaping me right now. But we're going to see from now until the end of this year, hundreds of localities across New York redrawing their district boundaries, because you've got to do this before the next general election after the census is delivered. Also, unlike the delay that the state had to encounter because of the pandemic delays in delivering the census data, the counties, cities, and towns don't have it as bad, since most of them aren't starting until now, and they've had the data now for about 5-6 months. Now, New York has different kinds of counties. We have charter counties, of which there are 23, and I list them here, and there are non-charter counties, which are the remaining 40 some odd others. And in the 1960s, after the Supreme Court handed down the Baker versus Carr decision in 1962, that held that that districting is something justiciable, that the courts would entertain them, we first saw congressional districts and state legislative districts all redrawn across the country. By 1967, 1968, the Supreme Court also ruled that one person, one vote applied to county and local governments as well. So that's why we see everybody redistricting. Back in the early 1960s, the courts weren't quite sure whether every government should redistrict or not. But now it's pretty uniform that every legislative body in the country that elects candidates from districts has to redraw their lines based on population equality. And in the counties in New York, we have the one person, one vote mandate with single member districts, multi-member districts, or weighted voting. And weighted voting, essentially, it takes place in counties that tend to want to stay with their town government form of history and provide each township with representation in the county legislature, or more often called the Board of Supervisors. And weighted voting means that if you have, let's say, 3 townships in a county, each supervisor has a vote commensurate with the population for that township. So one member may have, let's say, 2 votes and another has 1 vote. It's based on the weight, the balance of their population, so that no single member has more voting power than the others. and 17 counties elect their county boards with city-based wards, kind of a combination. Now, of the counties, 7 counties use multi-member districts, and a multi-member district is where you have one district that might elect 3 members. But again, there's a weighted system to it so that the vote from districts with 1 elected official or 3 all balances out, that the multi-member delegates, representatives have less of a vote than a member from another district, so it all equalizes. 2 counties use a combination of single member districts and 2-member districts, so it really varies. And Schenectady County is one example, uses both weighted voting and multi-member districts. So we don't have time tonight to go into depth for each county, but you can see that of the thousands of local governments across New York State, ranging from counties down to sewer districts and fire districts, it's a very complex system here that we go through. For townships, there are 932 towns in New York State. Most towns are governed by a supervisor and a town board. And under state law, town boards can include as few as 3 people and as many as 7 people. Most townships elect their members either at large or in single member districts. State law allows towns to go either way, but we've seen recently in the last 20 or so years, several towns have moved from multi-member or at-large district schemes to single-member districts because of Federal Voting Rights Act violations. I'll mention a few of those before I conclude. For cities, we have 62 cities in New York State. 15 elect their city councils at large. 35 elect by districts or wards, they're really the same thing, and an at-large mix. Again, every legislator ends up having the same vote as each other. 12 cities use single-member districts, and cities like counties can also adopt their own charters and conduct their redistricting, as well as other municipal services according to the city's own dictates. And we also have villages. Village boards are mostly elected at large throughout the state. One example that stands out differently is the village of Portchester in Westchester County, which uses cumulative voting because it was found by a federal court about 10, 15 years ago that the Hispanic population in Portchester, which was sizably large and could have made up at least 50% of a single member district, had there been single member districts, it was found to have had a Voting Rights Act violation. Rather than go to single member districts, the township chose cumulative voting, which is one of the alternative voting systems similar to ranked choice voting. Now, the Voting Rights Act applies where many local at-large election schemes led to minority vote dilution. So in New York, most recently, in this since the 1990s, we've had challenges brought against at-large boards in Niagara Falls, town of Hempstead on Long Island, Islip on Long Island, East Ramapo in Rockland County, Westchester's Portchester, and against the Albany County Legislature. In Niagara Falls and Babylon, those at-large schemes were found not to be discriminatory, but others had to enact remedial plans to create new minority districts. Most recently, just last year in the town of Islip, the 5-member at-large town board was found not to permit the growing 35–40% cluster of the entire township the ability to elect one candidate from a single district. So in in mid-2021, a federal court found a Section 2 violation through a consent decree, and Islip now has 5 single-member representatives on its town board. And nearby in Hempstead Township in Nassau County, the 5-member at-large board there was changed to a 5-member single-member district scheme where at least one African-American preferred board member has been elected. And in terms of future action, where we go from here, we have possibilities of institutional changes where town boards or county legislatures make changes internally. Just to give you an example, in the last 20 years, the town of North Hempstead in Nassau County and the town of Brookhaven in Suffolk County decided on their own that it would be better to have single member districts than at-large districts. So without any Voting Rights Act or problems, litigation, or other kinds of court suits, the townships simply went from at-large to single member districts. We also might see more action in making school board elections subject to single member districts. We had the example also late last year in East Ramapo Township in Rockland County of the school board not enabling the large Hispanic population to elect anybody to the school board. So they've switched that system also to allow the Hispanic community to have representation on the school board there. So that gives you the I think the 30,000-foot view of who redistricts, when to redistrict, what it's all about. I'd be delighted if you want to follow up with any questions later. Here's my email address, and I'll make this presentation available to the league afterwards if you'd like to get in contact with me. So I will close with this and go back to our moderator. So thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. And yes, there are already some questions in the chat, and we will get to those at the end. We're going to have all the three presentations first. I will say that at the end of that toolkit that is on our website, we do have a link to the New York Law School's. It's a great resource where you can find out in your county. You can click in per county, you can find out exactly what kind of government you have, what needs to be redistricted, et cetera, et cetera. So it's county by county. So instead of us trying to recreate that, we just put the link to the New York Law School at the end of our toolkit. So there's another resource for you to look at. So thanks, Jeff. And let's move on now. Dale Barbaria has worked on the staff of Assemblywoman Amy Paulin since January 2020. His work has included assisting in the drafting of the Assemblywoman's elections-related legislation. A resident of New Rochelle, Dale graduated from Cornell University in 2019 with a degree in mechanical engineering and a minor in policy analysis and management. So thank you, Dale, and I'll turn it over to you.
So I will also be sharing a presentation, and what I'll be talking about tonight is a piece of legislation that Assemblywoman Paulin sponsored and was signed into law last year by Governor Hochul. So the chapter number and bill number are there in case you want to look up the bill later. It was chapter 516 of 2020, also known as Bill A229C S5160B of 2020. Now, this bill did two main things. It took the standards that are in New York state law that cover redistricting for counties and local governments, and it took them from only covering at the county level non-charter counties to also covering charter counties. And at the same time, it also updated those standards for both the non-charter counties and the charter counties. And so I'm going to go a little bit in depth on both of those topics so you can all understand exactly what the implications are. So here is a map of all of the non-charter counties in New York. And those are the only counties with county legislatures. Not all of them have county legislatures, but for those counties that do, that are covered in blue on this map, they would have been covered by the state standards. And none of the other counties were. And this is actually a bill that is something Paulin introduced in her second year in the legislature in 2002, because of prior work she had done with her county League of Women Voters after the 1990 round of census and redistricting, where she had challenged the division of her town into 3 districts by her county legislature. And they had ruled through the courts that the standards in New York state law only applied to the non-charter counties. And because the Assemblywoman at the time lived in a charter county, the rules that were in state law about dividing towns didn't cover that county. So here are the charter counties that are now covered by the standards in state law. As a notice, we're only talking here about the counties outside of New York City, most of the charter counties are the more populous counties in the state. You have the Long Island and downstate suburban counties, Monroe County, where Rochester is, where I think Barbara is going to talk after me in more depth about what's going on there. But you also have Erie County, where Buffalo is, Onondaga, where Syracuse is, and Albany County, of course, where the city of Albany is. And all of these counties now that have county legislatures, which all of the charter counties do, now have standards they have to follow for redistricting. But in addition to covering charter counties, the other part of the bill, which is very important, was it updated those standards. So here are the standards that were in state law until last year that covered non-charter counties and certain towns and cities and villages that have districts, I guess not many villages, but some cities and towns. And these were not great. We had advocates that approached our office, including Jeff Weiss himself, who informed us that these could be updated and improved. And if we were going to pass a bill that was going to expand the coverage of these standards, they should also work better. The standards listed here are not perfect. The standard about population deviation is vague, as is the standard about districts being contiguous and compact. And the standard that was very important to the Assemblywoman about not dividing communities, it was also not well worded. It only applied to towns, and it actually applied to some fairly large towns, where if you were to follow the standard that was in the law about not dividing towns, it would actually force counties in some cases to have what would have been an illegal level of population deviation. So those standards were updated. And here are the new standards that were put into law last year, which now cover county legislature redistricting for all counties that have legislatures in New York. And there's some bolded phrases as you go through these standards for the important parts of each one, which I'll go over in a moment. But these are much more comprehensive. They're also importantly in a priority order. So the old standards that were in the law for non-charter counties were not in a priority order. And that was an important addition that was made, which forces counties to follow the standards in the order they're written. So when standards for redistricting are not in a priority order, a county could choose to follow any of the standards they want. And if the map is challenged in court, they could say they ignored one standard because they were trying to adhere to another one. When they're in a priority order, they have to the order and follow that. So here's a bit of a summary for what those new standards are. The first standard that they have to follow has to do with population deviation. And it's got a very specific level of population deviation, which is 5% total deviation. That means that however large the percent deviation is for the largest district from the average or mean district size, that difference between that deviation and the deviation for the smallest district from the mean can exceed 5% total deviation. The second standard has to do with minority voting rights and respecting the equal opportunity of race and language minorities. And as Jeff Weiss pointed out, it has phrasing that somewhat echoes the Section 2 requirements of the Voting Rights Act for creating majority minority districts. And then there's a standard about contiguity, a standard about compactness, and then a standard that covers several topics, including that districts should not be drawn to discourage competition. They shouldn't be drawn to favor incumbents or political parties. They should maintain the cores of existing districts, cities, towns, and villages, and other communities of interest. And we kept in a standard that was really important that we liked about not dividing communities. And now it's expanded not just to not divide towns, but also cities and villages, but that are much smaller. So that if you're in a small town, city, or village, which we now said is 40% or smaller of the average district size, you shouldn't have that community split into multiple districts. And then the final standard included is that districts should be drawn to allow the orderly and efficient administration of elections. I saw somebody put in the chat that there's a community that has a discontiguous district in their town. That's an example of a district that would also be illegal because it's not contiguous, but also doesn't allow for the orderly and efficient administration of elections. You can't draw good election districts that allow the boards of elections to let voters know which district they live in. That's not good. And here's just the map of all of the counties outside of the city of New York. And as you can see, the green ones are the charter counties and the blue ones are the non-charter. So that's all the slides that I have, but I just want to really go into the implication there that is important, which is that if you are in a county with a county legislature, there are now standards in state law for fair redistricting. So you can advocate to your county legislators who are drawing the lines. Some counties have independent commissions, and regardless of what is in a county charter or a local law, they have to follow these standards now. And if they refuse to and they institute maps that are in violation of those standards, those maps could then be challenged in court and possibly overruled. So those are all of my slides, and I will also now give it back to the moderators.
Thank you, Dale. I appreciate all this information. And yes, people are starting to put stuff in chat, so that's great. But we will get to the questions as soon as we finish with all the presentations. So just bear with us. Now we have Barbara Grosh from the League in Rochester. And why we wanted to have Barbara on is that the League in Rochester has a redistricting committee that has been working very tirelessly on this issue and has been a great model, hopefully, for other leagues. So we wanted Barbara to be able to tell all the league members what is her league doing on this issue so that you all can take it and use it and hopefully get active as well. So Barbara is president of the League of Women Voters of Rochester Metropolitan Area. And before that, she served many years as director of voter services. Many years before that, she taught at the Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs. So I'm going to turn it over to Barbara. Thanks, Barbara.
Thanks, Laura. Hello to everybody. I see lots of familiar faces from Rochester. So go team. All right, I'm going to follow precedent and share my screen here with a PowerPoint. And so I'd like to welcome you all to Monroe County. I'll tell you just a little bit about us. We have about 750,000 people here, and a little bit less than a third of them live in the city of Rochester, the rest of them in the towns and the suburbs. The city is largely non-white and very heavily Democratic and very poor. The suburbs are largely white, not very poor, and about equally split between Republicans and Democrats. So that's the political background. I'm going to really skimp on explaining the politics of Monroe County because I want to focus more on what we did, and I could take all night if I tried to give you the full background. So the heritage that we came to work with this year is that we have some really ugly districts from the last time around. I put a picture of my poster child there. That's LD 26. It's not very compact. It contains fragments of, I think, 4 different neighborhood associations in the city of Rochester. It also contains fragments of 2 different Republican towns. So I think it violates a lot of the standards that I just heard about. I didn't even know the extent to which this is a terrible map. We have at least 3 villages in Monroe County that are split into more than 1 district. Some of our towns are split into as many as 4 districts, and some of our districts cover as many as 4 towns. So the overall effect is that it's really hard to keep track of who represents who in Monroe County legislature. I would venture to say that if you stood on a street corner and asked people who their county ledge rep is, I'm going to guess 98% or maybe 99% could not tell you. And the county legislature is largely invisible. Nobody knows who's there or what they do. Okay, so when we started out, all we wanted to do was make sure that it was above board and fair. We didn't have any really big agenda. So this is what we did. We started out early last year in February with a redistricting committee. And that committee made a list of all the organizations that we could think of that qualified as stakeholders in redistricting. Obviously, we used a really broad definition of stakeholders. And we set up some email lists and we set up some communications plan. I think when we started, we had 8 or 9 different emails. We planned to send them over the rest of the year, calling attention to various things about the redistricting process. And we followed that plan, and overall, it didn't seem to be generating much response from much of anyone for a long time. We felt like we were shouting into the wind. But, you know, there wasn't anything concrete to respond two. So the fact that people didn't respond wasn't that surprising. Okay, so that all changed in September. We gave a webinar for Monroe County talking about redistricting. We did it in general terms, like what are the principles, and we didn't expect too much, but in the chat on that webinar, we started getting discussion from some people who are members of neighborhood associations, and they started complaining about their neighborhood being divided up both in their assembly districts and in their county ledge districts. And that started leading to some discussions afterwards, and we started getting to know some of these neighborhood activists. And so we started basically getting some traction on our communications. People were paying attention. It turns out that same night that we were having our webinar, the county ledge created the redistricting commission. It had 5 people on it, 3 Republicans, because the Republicans controlled the legislature at that point, 2 Democrats. And then after that, started driving us crazy. Like, you know, just the creation of the commission was done as a matter of urgency. So it wasn't on the agenda for the county ledge meeting. It was just snuck in at the last minute. They don't put the agenda on the website until an hour or so before the meeting. And so it's easy to miss it. These hearings that they announced also, even though the dates had been announced, it was really hard to find out details as to how you could testify. So, you know, the first night, only 2 people showed up in person to testify. That was myself and Dave Gerritsen, who's also on this call. And there was one neighborhood activist who sent an email complaining about his neighborhood being divided and put in the wrong district. So, you know, we felt like we'd weighed in, but we went home that night and put stuff on social media and started contacting people and letting them know that really they should chime in. So, you know, you can see that the response started growing, so that in those first 3 nights, the last night, by the way, was a Friday night, and the hearing was 30 miles out into the country in a part of this county I'd never been to before. I mean, they were really hard to get to. But there were a lot of people testifying, and there were consistent themes that came up over and over again. Neighborhood associations and villages both complaining that they don't want to be divided up. It really makes it hard to be engaged citizens with access to the county if you're divided in that way. And a lot of people also started complaining about the secrecy and obscurity of the process. So we spent a lot of time communicating, sending out emails, social media, putting on our website, everything about what was going on. Okay, so this commission that I mentioned for these 5 people, in total for the whole process held 2 meetings, count them 2. And during those meetings, they never once had a discussion on how they would go about drawing the lines, or who would draw the lines, or what criteria they would use, or how they would get public input, or what they would do with the public input, how they would evaluate it. None of that was ever discussed. There was 1 vote held at the second meeting. The morning of that meeting, the commission was given the final maps that had been drawn up by the Republican consultants, and they were forced to vote on them. The 2 Democrats voted against them, the 3 Republicans voted for them. And so we had redistricting, and the new maps looked almost identical to the old maps, which they seem to consider to be a big advantage. Their legal consultant bragged all about it. He thought that they were preserving communities of interest by keeping the same lines. But given what I told you about how the old lines were drawn, we didn't see it that way. So some more on how the process worked. When they had the maps, they did make them available, but not really in a useful way. So they put up 29 PDFs for the 29 districts. They couldn't be searched. They weren't didn't have street indexes. They were pretty, is that large scale or small scale, where you can't see the street names? There are very few street names on the maps. Each map only had its own district. So if you were at the edge of a district, it was really hard to tell where you belonged. People had a hard time understanding the maps to see how they were affected. And we league members spent a lot of time emailing and having phone calls and even Zoom calls with people to look at maps together, or show people how to find out where they were on the maps. We spent a lot of time publicizing every step of the process. And, you know, local media is dead. You know, we have a newspaper. We have a daily paper and a weekly paper owned by our NPR station. We have some radio stations, some TV stations, almost no coverage. I mean, I think probably 3 or 4 articles in this whole 2-month process. So the league became the source of news to a lot of people, and we put a lot of work into being that source of news. The county ledge ended up holding here this full county ledge, not the redistricting commission. The full county ledge held hearings 3 different times, and we were able to get large turnouts at all of them, as many as 65 people at one of them. And, you know, even up to the end, we kept getting new people who hadn't come out before. And so we were overall impressed with how many people we were able to engage. In the end, the maps were passed in December. There were some amendments, but they didn't improve anything as far as we were concerned. So the upshot, in a way, it looked like we didn't achieve very much. And yet, what I didn't mention is that, of course, the county legislature was up for election during this period. And so the election was in November, right in the middle of the process. And the Republicans lost control of the legislature, so that they were trying their best to get things done as fast as they could, so that they could finish it before they left office at the end of the year. We were able to basically to slow them down enough that they didn't pass the maps until a week into December, which meant that the county executive could wait till January to decide whether to veto them or not. And he did veto them in early January. And by then they didn't have the supermajority, which they would have previously used to override his veto. So those maps are dead, they're history, and we have a new legislature. We're going to start the process all over again. We have new players. The political ground has shifted quite a bit in very complicated ways, which I don't have the time to go into right now. So here's my conclusions. One is that neighborhood associations are the stakeholders that are most readily engageable to talk about redistricting. You should find out who yours are. League members are also people you can mobilize. I had a helper. We looked up every member of our league, which is 180 members, to find out what county ledge seat they were in. And I sent tailored emails to each county ledge district to our members, pointing out some aspects they might want to call to the attention. And a lot of people responded and did give testimony. There were other fellow traveler groups we really were able to connect with, especially over social media. So there's people out there if you find them. We found that the league still has a really good name, that people trusted us as a source of information. They were quoting us right and left, both on their own social media and in their testimony. So we were higher profile than I can remember being since I joined the league 12 years ago. And, you know, we feel like with enough public comments, you can get something done. You know, obviously it depends on what your political setup is, but it's possible. You know, they started looking so bad by the end. And in the last meeting, the Democrats were laboriously laying the groundwork for a lawsuit that could have thrown out the districts based on all the procedural missteps that have been made. And we also had been tracking all those and putting them on our website. The key to the whole thing is an agile communication plan. Get your lists of who you're going to connect with them early. We used the website, we used emails to large lists of people, and we used social media. And all three of those were important and effective. And, given that there was no local media to inform people, we really had to replace it. And so having your ducks in a row to be able to get information out quickly was key. All right, that is my advice to other leagues. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank
Yeah.
you. Okay, I have a couple of questions to start, but then anyone who has other questions, please put them in the chat and we'll try and get through as many as we can. Jeff, and I don't know if this is possible or not, but is there a succinct or simple explanation of the difference between charter counties and non-charter counties? How do they operate? How are they established, I guess?
Okay. Well, every county is subject to basic state law for their taxing powers, their administrative codes, their election systems, and the state home rule law allows individual counties to organize as charter counties, where the voters then are asked to approve a county charter, which then provides more authority for the county itself to govern itself. Counties without charters, for instance, don't have taxing authority over unincorporated areas. So the charter element gives the county more self-control, more self-government. Otherwise, it's subject to Albany and often having to go to Albany for permission to do things, whereas there's more autonomy for a charter county to govern itself.
Thank you.
I can just add a little bit to that.
That'd be great. Sure.
I just want to point out that non-charter county today can still go and get approval to become a chartered county. I like to think of a charter and as like a mini constitution for the county that gives them certain authorities. And even since this bill was first introduced, that is now law, there have actually been 3 more counties. I have my notes here. Ulster, Montgomery, and Steuben all went from being non-charter counties to having their own charters since the time that our bill had first been introduced in 2002. So it could happen to other non-charter counties in the future.
Thanks. Dale, can you follow up and just explain a little bit about at-large districts? And if there are at-large districts in any government, the county or a more local, do they have to do any redistricting at all?
No. So when there's representatives elected at large, that means they're elected at large from an existing entity, whether that's a town government where you could have 4 town councilmen all elected at large, or you could have in the form of a board of supervisors, where in essence, the supervisor from each town is elected at large in that town. In this case, what they would have to do, based on the latest census numbers, is recalculate what the weighted voting is for those members that are elected from the component towns or cities in a board of supervisors system, so that based on the latest population numbers, their weighted vote is equal to the number of people they represent. But they don't have to redraw any lines necessarily. Though we do have some counties, and we left this in there. So I had said that there's that 5% deviation requirement for single member districts. Jeff had mentioned that some counties had multi-member districts. We know that 3 charter counties have multi-member districts. So that's Schenectady, Steuben, and Rensselaer. So they theoretically don't have to redraw their lines. The way we left it open is they still have to provide substantially equal weight to the residents. And that would mean, like the Board of Supervisors with at-large districts, they would then have to recalculate the weighted voting. Though, as Jeff mentioned, Schenectady has a mix. So they could choose to leave their lines and only recalculate the weighted voting. They could redraw their lines and leave the weighted voting the same, or they could do some mixture of both, such that the residents have equal power through their representatives.
Yeah, and I would that's all correct, and I agree. I would just add that one thing we're seeing throughout the state are growing and emerging minority communities, so that where you do see in these multi-member or weighted voting system schemes, that if the minority community becomes large enough in a discrete, possibly isolated area, you need to be mindful of the electoral system there, should the population become large enough to be able to elect a preferred candidate, but not be given that opportunity because of minority vote dilution. That, I think, over the next 10, 20, 50 years will be a trend in New York State as it is across the country.
Thank you, Jeff. And for all you league members, and you thought state redistricting was confusing. Think now we're dealing with 63 different styles. But anyway, I have one more question I'm going to have a question for Barbara, and then Mary will go to you in a minute. But Barbara, can you talk a little bit, because I know that your redistricting committee, or your league at least, worked with a lot. You were talking about the neighborhood associations, and I know you did engage with a lot of community organizations throughout this process. Can you give any tips to other local leagues? How did you get those other community organizations involved or engaged, or how did you work with them to begin with? How did you pull them in? Because that's, you know, one of the goals of all our leagues these days is trying to partner and work with more community groups.
So actually, our list of stakeholders grew out of a list we made, was it a year or two ago, for voter registration and voter services. We sat down and made a list of every community organization we could think of that we believed cared about getting citizen engagement up. They cared about getting people both registered and informed and out to vote. So that included just a wide array. Some of it was churches and houses of worship. Some of it was fraternities and sororities. Some of it was settlement houses. Some of it was ethnic associations. I mean, we really cast a wide net. So we started having a mailing list for all of them, where we would send them stuff that they could put in their bulletin or their email newsletter that would be of interest to their publics. And then, you know, we thought again in the redistricting context, and I think that's when the neighborhood associations got added. I'm not sure they've been on our list before. At some point, we divided up the list and tried to call someone and make an actual personal contact with them. And some of those were more successful than others. Some of these groups we've been working with a long time. We co-sponsor candidate forums and educational forums with. So really it's the work of every year. We just found some new partners that we hadn't really known about before, and those were mostly the neighborhood associations.
Great. Thanks, Barbara. Mary Ollinger, do you still have a question? You took your hand down. Nope, you're set. Okay. Jeff, I don't know. Do you know much about Onondaga County? There's a very specific question. Did you see that in the chat?
I did.
Okay.
Yeah, what happened in Onondaga County is that
Jeff, just for people who don't know, that's the Syracuse area.
Okay.
So, okay.
Yeah, the Onondaga County legislature, in what I think is a misread of county law, decided to redistrict as early as it could. And in so doing, they made a lot of missteps. First off was to not understand or work with the new state law that Dale just talked about. So the county executive vetoed a first plan, and then, I'd say earlier in January, they enacted a second plan that fell into the 5% population deviation standard. Although I'm not quite sure, I think DeWitt is larger than 40% of a single district. So the criteria in the new law didn't apply in DeWitt, if I recall correctly. But what the plan did do was take a district that was a majority African-American population of about 57, 58%, and brought it down to the high 40s. And it's argued that by doing so, it's diluting the power of the Black community to continue to elect this preferred candidate. The county defended that by saying, well, we might have taken down the Black population, but we put Hispanic and Asian American voters into it to compensate. That's not how the law works. You simply can't lump people of color together thinking that they're all alike. So that plan is now signed by the county executive, and we'll have to wait and see if a lawsuit is brought to challenge it. My view is that the county did the wrong thing, but when you bring a Voting Rights Act lawsuit challenge or a 14th Amendment challenge, you have to basically go back and do 10 years of vote compilation, looking at every primary and general election in the area to see if there is a high level of vote dilution. So there's still some homework to be done by community groups to see if they can actually challenge the new plan or not.
Great, thanks, Jeff. Patricia from Albany is asked, does anyone know a rough count of the number of counties that actually have some form of independent redistricting in place?
Yep.
Jeff, any idea?
There are a few. The best model of an independent process is actually in Syracuse, where the city approved a new independent commission format in the last year or two. And in Syracuse, you're going to have I think it's a 15 or 16 member volunteer commission, not picked by the Common Council, but through a lottery system, draw the lines where they cannot take any political data or incumbency addresses into consideration. That commission has not really started off yet. They're just organizing. And the only catch is that the Common Council does have final approval by the end of the year over the commission's plan. But that really is the best model now to look at. Just disclaimer, I will be serving as counsel to that commission. Also, Ulster County has an independent process of sorts. Nassau County, where I'm from, has an example of what not to do. It's somewhat reminiscent of the New York State Commission, where it has a 9-member commission, 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans picked by the county legislative leaders, with the county executive picking a non-voting member who can't break a tie. And for the last 2 decades, the commission got absolutely nowhere, leaving it to the legislature to partisanly draw lines. I think the new Paulin-sponsored bill is going to put the brakes on counties like Nassau from doing partisan line drawing in a way that it's been doing, in the past. I also just mentioned New York City has a very good system, because although the mayor and the city council leaders select a commission, the commission's plan does not go to the city council for approval, and the criteria are ranked very similar to what's in the new state law. So between the Syracuse and Ulster County and New York City, you'll see your best models.
Great, thanks. Jeff, I hate to ask you this too, but somebody from Suffolk County is asking, Suffolk County exec just vetoed their maps as well, and they're saying they think they need a commission, but what if it can't come to agreement? Then what happens to it? Does it go to the legislature? What is the process when people, these maps keep getting vetoed? And
well, in most cases, the legislatures have final authority. In Suffolk County, the commission that's going to be impaneled will have until some point, I forget when, to recommend a plan to the county legislature, where the Republicans just took power. So there's a major concern there that although the Democrats were accused of pushing through a last-minute plan on December 31st, that actually created a very compact, very contiguous pro-minority voting rights map. It also created 9 Democratic-leaning and 9 Republican-leaning districts, but it paired 2 sets of Republicans into 2 districts, so they don't like it. and they convinced the county executive, a Democrat, 2 days ago to veto the plan, and now putting together a new scheme to resurrect a commission that should have appointed but wasn't appointed last year. It's just kind of the worst politics taking place in Suffolk right now.
Well, and I thought I remembered many years ago, not that many, but a few years ago, that Suffolk County had an independent redistricting process on paper that everyone thought was a good model that was going to be used in other counties as well.
Well, 10 years ago, when Suffolk County first created its commission, they just didn't create the commission. They just waited until after all the deadlines passed, never lifted a finger to appoint it. So the county legislature drew the plan on its own.
Yeah.
That was odd because they touted this great new commission scheme and then they ignored it.
Let's go back to Barbara for a minute. Barbara, thinking about, okay, so now you're basically at zero again. You can start all over again. What do you think you'd do differently now? What will the league do to engage more people and maybe make a more fair or at least transparent process? Sorry to put you on the spot. Yeah.
I mean, now that we know who finally did respond, we talked to them even earlier. Specifically, I think the people we didn't connect with as well as we could have are some of the villages that are most affected. Some of them never did speak up, and I think that's a shame. So I don't know. I mean, you can always say you would talk to people more or do more webinars, but people get tired of webinars. So I don't know that it would have really done a lot.
Right. Do you think it's an education issue that people just need to learn what the impact of all of this is? I mean, I know leagues all across the state have been working to do that all year. Do you think it's kind of now?
It's amazingly hard to do. And I say that, like, I think of conversations I had with people who are tremendously engaged politically. One's a city council member, one ran for the county ledge, and they were not well informed on what was going on. Like, people, it's just really in the weeds. It's not reported on in the media. Like, it's really hard to know. And you're just used to the districts you have. You don't most of the time think about them. And then there's like a window of a few weeks when you can make a difference, but you haven't thought about them, so you don't know what to say. So I guess that was like, that's actually what I would do. Like I spent about an evening like going through every single district and saying, well, what would I like the members of this district to know about the shape of their district and who they're with and who they're not with? You know, if we had divvied that up in advance and done more careful thinking about that, maybe we could have publicized that more fully. That's my final answer. Yeah.
Thanks, Barbara. I'm going to call actually on someone else because Michelle Lamberti from the League in Port Washington, Manhasset had a comment in the chat that I think was real interesting. She's been very involved in redistricting. And Michelle, do you mind speaking up and you're saying and tell them what you did that you thought that was a way to get people engaged and what did you do to do that? So are you there, Michelle?
Yeah, oh yeah, I'm here.
There you are.
Thanks, Laura. Hi, everyone. So I've done a number of these presentations, and I do think the educational piece is important, but I found that I've gotten the most engagement when I've really walked through the maps with people. And I did this, I do redistricting for work too, but for the league, I did a presentation in Almont, which is a community in Nassau County. It's heavily African-American. It was for a neighborhood association. And in particular for their district, what I did for, not so much for congressional, but for state Senate and state assembly was to go through some tools. And there are great tools that were available. Jeff probably talked about them. I missed the beginning, but Redistricting in You, where you can pull up lots of great maps. And so for me, it was really able to show them existing lines, proposed lines for their districts. Redistrict, if we ever want to do this, I'm happy to work with Laura to kind of show people how to use the technology, but also really helpful to point out there are layers that you can add that show city and town boundaries. You can show racial, ethnic demographics. So it was really helpful for me to be able to point out to folks sometimes there. And I helped someone prepare testimony in Nassau to show like, there is a corridor where you could create a community of color or a district that's predominantly people of color, but think about where the lines are divided and why they're divided there. And think about the way that you're being grouped. And so when you think about the other communities, the proposed maps have you put with, like, do you feel like that those are communities that are similar to you? And if not, why? And then always bring it back to like kind of the local level too. So I always emphasize, it's about your school funding, your roads, like the resources that are available to your towns. But I found that stuff really, people are engaged because they can see it and interact with it. Even if they're not drawing their own maps, like that's like kind of a separate thing. I think it's great for people who are interested. But I think if you are able to Barbara's point, Nassau is easier. We only have 19 legislative districts, but if you are able to do that with each or at least some of your legislative districts and prioritize them, I think when people see the interaction, it can be helpful for them. So that's
Thanks,
just like
Michelle.
one example.
No, thanks, Michelle. And I will say, again, on our league website at that nyredistricting.org, we still have all the training of the different software, the mapping software. So if anyone does want to start playing with maps, there's interactive maps there. There's training on Dave's redistricting and some of the other software programs that we've been talking about. So it's all still up there. And you can now use it for county or local redistricting as well.
So I guess let me add one more thing.
Go ahead.
The thing that drove us really crazy was that they made it so hard for people to tell where they were, and they didn't allow enough time for people to learn. So, and then the fact that there's no time between the official hearing and the voting, right? They don't have to take a 5-minute bathroom break to discuss what they heard. They listen to it and then they vote on what's already been proposed. So now if I was doing it again, I think I would, and maybe we'll do this, my committee's on here, that's great. Start getting pledges from the president of the legislature and all your district representatives and say, can you pledge to us that you will give us time to have access to the maps and to understand them, and that you will schedule time between the hearing and the finalization so that you can incorporate changes to try to get public pledges on that, and as much hoopla as you can about a commitment to that process. I think would be really helpful.
If I
Thanks,
could
Barbara.
add,
Go ahead, Jeff.
I agree with that, but also mention in Onondaga County, as I'm told, a majority of the county legislature supported creation of an independent process similar to the Syracuse City changeover to a commission. And then when push came to shove, one by one, they abandoned that pledge. And there's also a pledge in New York State for a commission that Ed Koch led the campaign 10 years ago. So when you look for the pledge, bind them to it.
Well, it gives you something to ask them about at the next candidate
Yeah.
forum you sponsor.
Dale, I want to come back to you for a minute. The standards that were in Assemblywoman Paulin's bill and now are law. Barbara even was surprised. She mentioned she didn't realize that those standards had passed and that all the counties had to abide by those. Has the Assemblywoman thought about any kind of education process of this law? I mean, we've done some on it, but is there any kind of education to try and make sure that these county legislatures know that this law is in place now?
I believe that there are no future plans. I think we're well underway in the process, but many of the counties have been informed over the past few months. We work closely with the New York Association of Counties to make sure they knew that the bill was coming up. I believe Jeff may have even spoken at one of their events and mentioned the bill. And at this point, all of the counties should, and the county legislators should be aware. I think when the county legislators are not following this. Have I
Okay.
disconnected? Am I still here? Sorry, I froze
No,
there for a second.
I think I
and-
have bad internet, so.
And in Onondaga, I believe that when the county executive vetoed the maps, they were aware of the rules and they chose not to follow them. And they had population deviation that exceeded the new requirement. So the county legislators know. And I think it's important as members of the public and as part of a group like the League of Women Voters that you hold elected officials to account so that they don't unduly take away the voting rights of the residents of those counties.
Yeah, I've done 2 webinars and 1 live session for the State Association of Counties on the new law, and I'm planning to do another one sometime in February because the counties are still a bit confused. Both the NISTAC and I are getting a lot of calls on how to interpret the new law.
Yeah, and Michelle actually put in the chat again, I think it's a great idea. Local leagues, you should think about now, you know, you will have the slides from Dale's presentation and all. You know, make sure that your legislators know that this is the law and that these standards do exist and that and you're going to hold them to it. And then I think, as Barbara said, you know, a typical league fashion, everything, we want transparency. We want time for everybody to be able to see everything before votes and decisions are made. So I think, you know, those are great takeaways for the local leagues to be doing as kind of easier tasks. So I'm trying to see, Jeff, go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, just to add to that, I've been working with a group of citizen volunteers in Broome County, who I think are working with the league there over Broome County redistricting. And it's odd to say this, but the longtime county attorney wrote a memo, which he had to recant, but he said basically that the new state law is vague, unspecific, that there's no real legislative history behind it. And then he went on to use a 1973 or 4 court decision, totally out of date, to back up using or keeping the old so-called 10% deviation standard. You know, under federal Supreme Court precedent, you're allowed to differ from the size of the smallest to largest district by up to 10%. And it was a New York State policy choice to bring that 10% deviation difference down to 5%. But the county attorney had the audacity to say, well, you know, this is confusing. And I've got this 40-year-old decision that says otherwise, 10% is fine. Well, he was convinced to basically backtrack I couldn't believe a county attorney would be saying this, but you might be up against this in some areas where they're simply saying, oh, that's just what the Democrats did in Albany, ignore it, which was basically what was happening in Broome County.
Dale, don't bother telling the Assemblywoman that story.
Well, I think I will just say that, you know, as somebody who worked with the Assemblywoman on this bill, it was not an accident that the deviation requirement was put at 5%. And it's there as the first standard, and it is unique. Most places do fall back on the 10% court precedent that shows when a district is in violation of the 14th Amendment, but we're not limited to that. And 5% really says to counties, you can't have districts that are widely different in population. You need to be able to keep as close as possible equal population districts. And that's really one of, you know, people talk a lot about cracking and packing, but something else counties do is they overpopulate districts where the people who they don't want in power are. And so that allows there to be fewer districts with more people, and they underpopulate districts where the people in power are. And that allows there to be more districts with fewer people. And it's a really simple way. If you narrow that margin, you have districts that are closer in population, and it reduces ability for people to gerrymander in that way.
Thanks, Dale. In the chat, Gail Crow from Chautauqua County said that they put a letter in their local paper. Gail, if you don't mind, send me an email and attach the letter so we can share it with everyone, because others might want to. You can't copy it exactly, but you could make it, customize it for your own county or your own league and submit something to the local paper on this new law to educate the legislators and force them to pay attention to what the new law is. So Gail, if you'd send that to us, it would be great. Jeff, Steve Elliott actually has a question. Is the 5% margin practicable at the ED level?
Well, Steve, you're talking about splitting an ED? I'm not quite
You
sure.
you might want to explain, Jeff, ED.
Election district. In other words, by going to that low a deviation number, might you end up splitting election districts? I see.
I
there's
think,
a-
Jeff, the question here is if you were to draw a district map based on the prior decade's election districts, would you be able to limit it to 5% deviation rather than going down to the census block level?
Well,
And
you
I think
need
the
to,
answer here is that you draw using the census blocks, and then the election districts are organized by the county board after the congressional, state senate, state
right,
assembly,
yeah,
and local
exactly.
districts
Yeah,
are
one
drawn.
thing, I am working on an effort with the Benjamin Center at SUNY New Paltz, where we are actually providing assistance to localities. And one of the things that we've started to do is to correlate the new census geography, because many of the census blocks themselves have changed from 10 years ago. And with the enactment in the next few days of new state assembly districts, you're going to see a realignment of election districts within assembly districts, and the election districts have to also comport with the new census blocks that the assembly districts will comport with, because the Census Bureau and the legislature, the state, work together to match up the election districts with the census blocks. And the census block essentially is the smallest unit of census counting the Census Bureau uses. In a city setting, a block is almost equivalent to a city block. In a rural area, a census block may be 2 or 3 blocks. So there is a correlation process you've got to work out.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions? I think, and if I've missed some in the chat, please raise your electronic hand, your Zoom hand, so you'll jump up to the top and we'll notice, and we'll get your question answered. No, okay. Okay, I'm going to read this one. When the county publishes a map, we should ask the census block to district table big so we can import it into the mapping program to more easily show people the maps. That's a comment from Bruce Mellon.
Bruce is one of our neighborhood activists. He's good
Okay.
with maps. Yes, I mean, if they aren't going to make the maps easy for people to see, that would be the next best.
Well,
But
and
they really
yes.
should make the maps easy to see.
Yeah.
Well, and I
one
think
thing-
that's what Michelle's saying. That's how you get people engaged. That's how you get people interested. If they can actually see what the maps are and what they might be, I think that's when people start caring a little bit more and might participate.
Yeah, many
Jeff,
jurisdictions are going to only publish or post a PDF map that might not be of really granular quality to get down to the street, the block, the boulevard, the road level. And that's what's really critical. So one thing that many governments are hesitant to make public, but really need to, and it's silly not to, are something called shape files, which are electronic files that, when put into software, you can actually see the map at the street level. And I think, as I've heard on this webinar, talk of things like Dave's Redistricting. There are several free websites that you can actually go online. It takes a little bit of learning, but you can upload a shapefile and then see the kind of a map that you want to look at. Whereas the enacting government only put up a PDF where you really, your computer can't blow things up down to the block by block level. And if they don't,
and that's what, actually at the state level, the IRC, the first maps they put out were PDF. And I will say that the league was able to with Millie and Jennifer at the time, they converted them to Google Maps so people could drill down. And then the IRC, I believe, did come out with maps that were more interactive, but.
Yeah. New York State began publishing the shape files, if not 10 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, but that information is there, and they're hiding something if they don't want you to have that public information.
Right, I agree. Any other questions? Oh, Michelle, go ahead.
Yeah, that's kind of a follow-up question for Jeff. On the legal side, is there any way to compel production of like the shape files or GeoJSON, but like any of those files so that
A FOIA request.
that's it?
You know, I mean, unless there's a city, county charter, requirement that every document be made public, and don't let them argue that a electronic file isn't a paper file, but you have to FOIA it. I mean, oddly enough, the Independent Redistricting Commission is saying, if you want to know what we did behind closed doors, you have to FOIA it. Whereas California, Virginia, Michigan, they did all their line drawing in public, online for all to see. We have no idea what the fights were about in New York and the commission behind closed doors. We have no idea what this 90% agreement they reached in the lines was all about.
All right, well, before we leave, I want to put it onto a more positive note, Jeff, and go back to what leagues and league members can do. And I think, Barbara gave all the members some good tips on how to engage people. Michelle talked about showing people maps and walking them through the differences so that they can actually know why it matters. And I think Barbara touched on working with so many different neighborhood groups. I think all of us as league members, and those of you who are not league members that are on, you can do, obviously you can do it too. I think we need to ask our neighbor, do you realize what's going on, and try and educate more and more people about the process and what is the impact in your own neighborhood, in your own town, in your own city, or in your own county. And hopefully the league can lead the way in many counties. And we're going to keep providing as much information as we can to you. And so keep asking us questions, and we will get back to you. But now I would like to just remind you that the website nyredistricting.org, that will has lots of information right now. Most of it's focused on state redistricting, but the new guide or toolkit that Millie created for the county redistricting process is posted there. And the recording to tonight's program, as well as all the slides from the speakers, will be posted on there as well. So I want to thank our speakers very much for speaking tonight. Jeff, you have another comment?
One last quick closing comment. I would be delighted through the New York Law School Census and Redistricting Institute to work with you and Millie and the league on providing webinars, explanations, evening sessions. I spent the last 2 years several nights a week doing this on the state level. And you have much more impact at the local level in your towns and counties. So I'd love to partner with you and help everybody that contacts us to provide educational training programs.
Thanks, Jeff. That is fantastic.
That's a
So
nice
now
offer.
all the local leagues, you don't have any excuse. All you have to do is reach out to Millie or me, and we will connect with Jeff, and see if we can help your own local league get up to speed on this, educating the members and taking some action. So I want to thank everyone tonight, and this has been great. And we will hopefully take more action in the near future in each of these counties. So thanks everyone, and have a good evening.
Thanks, Laura.